Right, it's the top of the hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started, and we'll let folks continue to trickle in. My name is Tim Pope. I am excited to be with the team at Illustrative Mathematics and to be with you this evening to share the great new work that we've done with the middle school curriculum. And we have two phenomenal presenters here to share it with you. Before we begin, just a couple of practical things in terms of how to engage with us in the webinar. If you go to the bottom of your screen, a little ribbon will pop up, and there's a couple buttons that I want to make sure everyone understands the distinction. One is called Q&A. If you have a question for the presenters while they're speaking, feel free at any point to go ahead and type in your question there. I will go through while they're presenting, and I'll answer the ones I can. We'll pick some to discuss at the end of the session. But if you put a question in the Q&A, know that with the recording of the webinar, we'll also provide a document with answers to all the questions. So if you have a question that you want to make sure you get an answer to, I recommend using the Q&A tool to add that to ask that question, and you'll get an answer either within the webinar or when the recording goes out. There's also a chat tool. So if you'd like to just send a quick note to either the panelists or to the attendees, feel free to use that chat tool. Know that that doesn't get recorded. And so any questions that are put in the chat tool may not make it in terms of into the document to make sure that those answers are provided. Know that at the end of the webinar, I'll get back on and talk a bit about how to access the improvements and the enhancements that we put into the middle school curriculum. So stay tuned to the end of the webinar, and I'll provide support and help for how to make that happen. With that said, let's get started. I want to introduce our two speakers this evening. First is Bill McCallum. He is the president of Illustrative Mathematics and part of the group that founded the organization and helped spearhead and lead the project for the development of the 6-8 curriculum. And our second presenter is Liz Ramirez. She's our director of EL and student supports, who took the charge in working with our writing team to make the enhancements that we're going to share this evening possible and make them available to you. So with that said, I think Bill's going to speak first. So Bill, you're up.
Great. Thanks, Tim, and thanks everybody for coming. I'm going to let Liz do most of the talking today, but I just wanted to say a few things about why we did this. And first, I want to start out with an appreciation of the teachers in the webinar, in this country, people who work for us at Illustrative Mathematics, since it is Teacher Appreciation Week. I had a 7th grade math teacher whose name was Freddie Kainita, who told me long before I knew it that I was going to be a mathematician, and he was right. He was a wonderful math teacher, and I want to thank him as well. I want to say a little bit about why we created this version. So, as you know, Illustrative Mathematics is dedicated to creating a world where learners know, use, and enjoy mathematics. And to us, that means all learners. And so a lot of the enhancements that Liz is going to talk about tonight are about enhancements for English language learners and students with disabilities. She's also going to talk about some of the other neat things we've added to this version. And that are just, we had the opportunity to add a few things. So she'll give you all the details on that. And I want to say a little bit about the version number, 3.1415. I know that sounds a little geeky and a little funny. We are a little geeky as an organization, and we like to have fun. But also, you know, there's something about open education resources that makes the old sort of version 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. Like, there are going to be so many versions, hopefully, of this curriculum. There are people, as it is, as you know, it's an open education resource. Anybody can take it and do what they want with it. So we wanted a version number that said something about us as an organization. Some of you may know that pi is irrational. Some of you may know that pi is in fact more than irrational. It is transcendental, which means it is not the solution of any polynomial equation with rational coefficients. We aim for transcendence. but we are rational ourselves, so 3.1415 is a rational approximation to transcendence. And that's why we chose that number. Anyway, I'm going to let Liz do the rest of the talking this evening, so I'm going to hand it over to you now, Liz.
Wonderful, thanks, Bill. Hello, everyone. I'm so glad so many of you could join us today. Welcome. We have a bunch of exciting updates to share, so let's get started. Here at Illustrative Mathematics, we believe that every student can learn grade level mathematics with the right opportunities and support. So our approach is to remove unnecessary barriers and provide teachers with options for additional support so that all students can engage in rigorous mathematical content. Here's a look at the agenda for today. First off, we'll talk through the enhancements we've made to the teacher tools and supports for English language learners and for students with disabilities. And I'll also talk about the professional learning offerings we have to support teachers with the new materials. And like Bill said, there's some other exciting updates that I'll mention briefly as well. We'll see how much time we have. So first up, supports for English learners. We've made some exciting changes by enhancing the existing resources and adding some new features that promote and develop mathematical language at every level of the curriculum, from the course level right down to the activity level. All of the work we've done stems from the framework stems from the framework for supporting English learners designed for us by the Understanding Language team at the Stanford Center for Assessment, Learning, and Equity, formerly UL Scale. So these 4 design principles guide the creation of materials so students use language to support sense making, to optimize output, cultivate conversation, and maximize meta-awareness, all to promote mathematical language use and development in the curriculum and through instruction. And there's more information about these design principles in the course guide or in the teacher guide materials. So what's new? The Supporting English Language Learners section of the teacher guide provides teachers with additional insight into our focus on language development throughout the curriculum. We've made a couple of updates. The first in response to teachers asking for more detailed descriptions of each of the math language routines. Oops, sorry. For those of you who are unfamiliar, math language routines are structured but adaptable formats for amplifying, assessing, and developing students' language. They're similar to instructional routines in that they structure student interactions, but provide an additional focus on language development. There are 8 of them we have throughout the curriculum, and they're listed there. Stronger and clear each time, collect and display, clarify, critique, and correct, information gap, co-craft questions, 3 reads, compare and connect, and discussion supports. So here's a couple of examples in a little bit more detail. I'll give you a second to take a look at those 3. And again, we have more detailed descriptions of each of the math language routines in the teacher guide. A new addition to the teacher guide is our sample sentence frames for common disciplinary language functions featured prominently throughout the curriculum. So this section of the course guide includes some examples of generic sentence frames that teachers can use to amplify and support the different ways students will communicate their understanding. We've also provided in there some guidance for teachers on best practices in using sentence frames in their lessons. Sorry, I seem to be double clicking here as I go. Right. Now down to the unit level, we have 2 additions that I am super excited to share with you all. Within the teacher materials, each unit begins with an overview that describes the story of the unit and the mathematical work that students will engage with. We've added a progression of disciplinary language for each unit that describes how students will use language as they learn the mathematical content of that unit. So here's a snapshot of a portion of the language progression for Unit 3 in grade 6. So for example, teachers have information now. They can see that in this unit, students will interpret tape diagrams used to represent percentages in lesson 12. They will be asked to explain strategies for finding missing information involving percentages in lesson 14. Students will use mathematical language to justify their reasoning about equivalent ratios and rates in lesson 7. So like I said, we have a progression of disciplinary language for each unit, and depending on the unit, students will use language to describe, compare and contrast, generalize, critique, interpret, explain, justify, and so on. The next new exciting addition at the unit level are the new terminology tables for each unit. Here's an example from grade 6 in Unit 3. So these tables show where new terms are introduced and help teachers to know when students can be expected to understand a word or phrase receptively, and when students should be producing these words or phrases using their own speaking or writing. So you might notice that, for example, unit rate, we want students to be able to understand receptively in lesson 6, and then later on, we can expect them to be able to produce this language in their writing and speaking in a later lesson. Next up, if we go down to the lesson level, all learning goals have been revised to reflect both the mathematical content and the language demands for each lesson. Apologies, for some reason, my computer is not advancing at the same time as I speak. I'll give you a moment to read through this example from a lesson in grade 6. Think about what you notice when you compare the original learning goals with the revised version. So I see some of you have noticed that these learning goals mention the way students are going to use language to communicate their understanding. We've also updated the student glossary to make it more accessible with student-friendly language without compromising the rigor of the content. Glossary terms are tied to the place where they first appear in the curriculum. As a result, definitions do not include representations that have not yet been introduced to students. We've added 84% more pictures from 56 up to 103, and decreased the average Flesch-Kincaid reading grade level of the glossary by more than 1.5 grade levels from 7.3 to 5.6. And this is sort of what indicates how readable our glossary will be for our students. Here are a couple of examples. Take a moment to read through and see what you notice. Our original glossary definition is on the left and the new one is on the right. Another example. So you may have noticed that the new definition on the right no longer refers to the constant of proportionality, since that term is introduced later for students.
Liz, I just interrupted. A few people in the chat are sharing their noticings that I thought might be interesting to share. Norma says she's noticing it's contextualized and visual, and James likes the vocabulary simplification a lot. Jenny's also being very complimentary. She loves it.
Great. I, for some reason, can't seem to see the chat from where I'm at, so I'm glad to hear if people are engaging. I'm not ignoring you.
I'm there for you.
Great. So moving along, in the earlier version of the curriculum, only certain lessons featured additional supports for English learners. We're excited to announce that we now offer English language learner supports for every lesson, with suggested strategies for teachers to provide access to the language demands of each activity. So this is an example of the standard support we use to support English learners during number talks and algebra talks that are featured heavily throughout the curriculum. I'll give you a second to read that. All of the supports indicate the language demand, reading, writing, speaking, listening, conversing, or representing that are supported in the activity, and as well as the design principles. So in this case, optimize output for explanation. Here's another example from grade 8. In this activity, students were asked to consider what is the image of two parallel lines under a rigid transformation. This support suggests Math Language Routine 1, Stronger and Clear Each Time, as a structure to give students an opportunity to revise and refine both their ideas and their verbal and written output. So as I mentioned earlier, we revised the descriptions of the math language routines in the teacher guide to give a little bit more detail of how it happens or what teachers can expect when they use these routines with their students. Another thing we've done to help teachers get familiar with these routines is to include an extended support for the first time each math language routine appears in each course. So here's an example from grade 7. Like I said, this is an extended version, so there's way too much text to include on a single slide. And even what's there is pretty tiny, difficult to read. So I'll just describe the general structure and the types of things you'll be able to find in these extended supports. So the extended supports begin with this general description and purpose for the routine. Again, you know which language demands the routine is there to support, or the demands within the activity, and the design principles as well. This is followed by a detailed description of how it happens or how it might happen that mirrors the description in the teacher guide, but with more specific details based on the activity that the support is attached to. So included in this section are things like sample sentence frames for the teacher to display that support student discussion. Here we go. Teacher questions to prompt student discussion. And many of the supports also include a sample narrative that paints a picture of what this could look or sound like in a classroom. There's an example there. And in some cases, there's also some suggested guidance for students who may need additional support. So in this case, if students continue to have difficulty, there's some instructional strategies that teachers can follow. Here we go. So yeah, lots of exciting things to look forward to in terms of English language learner supports at all levels of the curriculum. Next up, we'll talk about the enhancements we've made to provide teachers with more tools to support students with disabilities. So first up, we've updated the teacher guide or course guide to include additional background information and general guidelines and practices for supporting students with disabilities. The additional supports for students with disabilities have been completely redesigned. Supports are now informed by and aligned to the Universal Design for Learning guidelines to support an equitable approach to instruction. So the supports for students with disabilities offer teachers suggestions to provide access through multiple means of engagement, representation, and action and expression. And for each of these three principles, there are 3 levels of support: supports that provide initial access, supports that help build or develop understanding, and then supports that are designed to help students internalize their learning. Also, based off the findings of the Addressing Accessibility in Mathematics project out of EDC, we've also tagged our supports with the 8 areas of cognitive demand that have a strong impact on learner success with mathematics. So here's an example of what that looks like. I invite you to take a moment to read through this example from one of our 8th grade activities. And think about, what you notice. Again, I can't quite see what's in the chat, or I can't see what's in the chat, but I'm hoping that you'll notice that the new supports are tied more explicitly towards the lesson and give teachers some actionable moves that they can make to support students. A couple more examples.
We have one person has shared that they like the use of actionable verbs and the use of color to draw attention to connections.
You may have noticed that each support begins by identifying the UDL principle and level that the support aligns to. What follows is a possible suggested instructional move. And the last line gives the area of cognitive demand that this supports accessibility for.
We also had someone share that they can see how educators can now connect to student IEP math goals with the language that's provided in these supports.
Okay, so some other enhancements we've made to the curriculum that you'll see coming up in version 3.1415. Sorry, there we go. My mouse pad's a little touchy today. We have added alt text for all images. I'm going to go through these one at a time, actually. Here we go. Alt text is a description of every image that is included to enhance accessibility for users with visual impairments. This may not appear on the student facing, but for students who have access, they'll be able to hear what the image, or hear a description of the images that are included in the curriculum. So pre-unit diagnostics, sorry, I've lost my thing. There we go. Let me go back here. We've added some guidance for how to use the results of the pre-unit diagnostic assessments. So here's an example. Take a look again at the before and after. So each item now includes an indication of which lesson students need the skill or concept for, and guidance on what to do if students struggle to do well on the item, on the assessment. We've added 4 new InfoGap activities to give students more frequent opportunities to practice this math language routine. New InfoGap activities were added to these lessons. And we've also added new lessons and assessments, new culminating lessons to these units in grade 6, 7, and 8, and mid-unit assessments added to grade 6, unit 6, and grade 7, unit 8. Now every lesson in all 3 grades has a culminating lesson where students have an opportunity to show off their problem-solving skills or apply the mathematics they have learned to a real-world problem. These mid-unit assessments were added because there were because these were 2 of the longer units that didn't previously have mid-unit assessments. Okay, finally, we have our IM certified professional learning that helps teachers to focus their instruction on the needs of their students. Here is a bird's eye view of the IM certified professional learning catalog. I'll give you a moment to take a look and read through. We have a variety of professional learning offerings provided at the foundational level and at the extension level. So we have our Teach and Learn professional learning offerings that are foundational, that really introduce teachers to all aspects of the curriculum. Once they're using the curriculum, we have the Teach and Respond, where you'll find PLCs and deeper dives into the content. And we also have our Teach and Lead series for teachers and coaches throughout the year. So our new and enhanced offerings, we have our Teaching and Learning with IM 6 to 8 Math, which is our introductory 2-day professional learning offering. We're going to have an additional version that has support and information for teachers of English learners. So in addition to our traditional 2-day introductory offering, we will have a special EL version of the 2-day offering. We also have math language routine modules 1 and 2 that are called Using Math Language Routines to Plan for Purposeful Mathematics Instruction. They offer a deep dive into how math language routines can be used to support mathematical language development for all students. And we also offer a PLC with a focus on planning to support students with disabilities. So all of these offerings are there offered through our partners to support teachers with using all of the components with the curriculum that we've talked about today. Okay, Tim, I think that's you.
All right, thank you very much. I think the most popular question that has come through has been, when is this all going to be available? So let me talk about that first, and then we'll get to some of the questions here that folks have for Bill and Liz. The support for students with disabilities that Liz just showed, along with the additional changes there at the end of her presentation, those are all available now. through our IAM certified distributors. So that would be Kendall Hunt and Learn Zillion and McGraw-Hill. And if you want to reach them, that URL there at the bottom of the screen, illustrativemathematics.org/IAM certified will get you contact information for all three of them, and you can access that now. The English language learner supports are going to be available this summer, and we will get a communication out to everybody to let everyone know as soon as those have been released to our partners to get to you. I also put in the URL there, the top one in purple is for our the demo version of our curriculum. So that's another place where you can go if you want to take a look at the, right now you can take a look at those changes, the supports for students with disabilities and the other changes, like I said, that was just presented. So that is how you get to look at what we've done. And now let's get to some of these questions. Some of them are great. Know that, like I said, I'm going to pick a few of them to talk about now. If we don't talk about it right now, know that you will get an answer. I know there was one great question about PD that I'm going to have answered later because I want our director of professional learning to take a stab at it. So I'm going to save that for him. But the first question, how does Illustrative Mathematics support students with learning disabilities that need examples of procedural practice? So I don't know which one of you wants to take a stab at that first.
Can you say a little bit more about what that means to you? I guess, I think,
Luke is the one who asked that question. Luke, I just turned, I gave you the ability to speak. So I turned off your mute. So if you want to answer Bill, if you want to respond to Bill, go ahead.
Hey, how are you? So basically, you know, I've had some teachers looking at it, and the main concern from a lot of my special education teachers or inclusion standalone teachers is that where do the students have an example to reference when they are trying to do some independent practice? And I know we could create graphic organizers for them that would include all this, but specifically, how does the curriculum support that?
So our approach to fluency and procedural practice is that it's embedded in the curriculum. And so I suppose that one possibility there would be to think about the way in which the just regular tasks that students are doing in the curriculum are intended to draw on that procedural practice rather than have it as a separate thing. We were out doing a site visit at a school in Delaware the other day, and we did hear a lot from the teachers of students with disabilities about this need, and so it's certainly something we're thinking about.
I would also add that depending on the concept, we do offer this, we do suggest this as an additional support for students with disabilities, except for we encourage teachers to engage students in the creation of whether it's the graphic organizer or the additional practice or some kind of reminder for themselves that comes from them to remind themselves of what they've learned and what they want to remember when it comes to future practice.
All right, I will ask the next question. This is from Jolene. How do you recommend implementing or transitioning to the IM curriculum or the IM curriculum into a modified math class? All units, a few units, something else?
Can you say what you mean when you, what you mean by modified?
Let me turn her mic on and then I'm sure she'd be happy to answer the question. There you go, Jolene, you're on. Or maybe not. I think Jolene, if you'd like to respond, I think you have to unmute yourself. I have it.
Hi. For students that are considerably below grade level, still having access to those grade level standards, how would you recommend implementing this if they can't seem to get through as many units as a regular education student? Would you do a few lessons in in each unit? Would you only do half of the units? What would you do for that?
So I think that's a decision that's going to be made differently by different schools with different philosophies about how to work with students who have unfinished learning. Again, in fact, the school that I was visiting in Delaware the other day had their own approach to it. For students who are just moderately below grade level, I think the curriculum works quite well in the way it provides multiple access points to many of the activities. But for students who are far below grade level, I think there are lots of different solutions out there. I will say that when the elementary curriculum comes out from illustrative mathematics, I would think that would be a rich resource for sort of to draw on for that sort of situation. The only other thing I would say is that the tagging of the curriculum to the standards, combined with things like SAP's diagram showing how standards link together, does give you some guidance on sort of where to go and look if you have students who are far below grade level. And there is an organization called Unbound Ed, which is working on this as well.
And I will impose maybe on Bill and Liz to maybe provide links to a couple of those resources when we do the typed versions of these answers in the follow-up, if you want to.
Sure.
Those resources.
Happy to do that.
I would also link there to our PLC that focuses on planning to support students with disabilities, since it can be such a district or school-specific decision.
A quick question here. There's a question, will the curriculum be available in Spanish and when? And I think I can handle that one. The answer is yes. And we are planning to have it available to our partner, releasing it to our partners in October. So follow up with any of our partners and they will, they'll be able to help you get that this fall. Question after that, have you looked at how the additional supports have affected the amount of time needed for a lesson or a unit?
Yes, so the additional supports potentially can add time to a lesson. We definitely realize that. So teachers are going to make decisions based on the needs of their students. Providing this additional access, whether it be support for students with disabilities or one of the math language routines that kind of extend an activity, will impact the remainder of the lesson. It's definitely a decision that teachers are going to use or make, but the alternative to not providing that access or students not being able to engage in the activity, that's the other side.
All right. There's a couple questions in the chat too, so I'm trying to look in two places. How does the curriculum support the learning of the advancement of this one? Luke, you might have to help us out here. How does the curriculum support the learning of the advancement or extension of learning?
So, you know, I know there's a lot of sports, and I'm kind of asking both ends of the spectrum here. You know, the first question was about spec ed, and now we're talking about who the kids are prepared to be extended, the higher.
Okay. I got it. Yeah, so we didn't talk about them in this webinar, but the curriculum has what we call "Are you ready for more?" questions in almost every lesson, and so those are for students who are ready for more. And one of the ways that I think is novel about the way we implemented this is they're not some separate set of materials that teachers will assign to students they think are advanced or have mastered the material and the lesson. They're there for any student to click on. Of course, a teacher can assign them, but the students can also just explore them themselves. So that's the way we support advanced learners.
All right, there have been a couple questions I just want to briefly address. Some clarification around, I am certified in the partners and what's available at no cost versus what there are charges for. So I mentioned before we have the three, actually Liz, if you could slide to the last, thank you. We have 3 IAM certified distribution partners, and at Illustrative we are committed to providing a resource that is freely available to all learners and all educators. So Kendall Hunt is the provider of the no-cost digital version of our curriculum. So you can contact them, and so everything we're talking about here is available to you through Kendall Hunt if you're looking for that no-cost option. And then LearnZillion and McGraw-Hill have taken our curriculum and then put it into their digital platforms, which would be more fully featured and maybe more analogous to what you would expect when you adopt a fully featured digital curriculum. And then there is a charge for that platform. But there will always be an IAM certified version of the curriculum with all the updates and enhancements that we do for middle school that will be available through a no-cost digital provider. So I did want to just to clarify on that. Sorry.
And I want to point out, Idaro has provided an answer, a bit of extra context for this question about the added time for implementing language supports there in the chat. And she points out that once these routines have been mastered, they don't necessarily add extra time and can even accelerate the flow.
And like I said, I know there are other questions that were asked that I'm gonna take offline because I want to make sure we get you the best answers from the best people on our team. So maybe we'll take this as a last question. For either of you, can you speak to your experiences using IAM with reluctant learners?
Well, I mean, my sort of source for this is the schools we visited and the teachers we've talked to. I mean, if there's one thing I hear over and over again, it is teachers expressing amazement at the engagement of students. And I think that's partly because of the warm-ups we have designed into every lesson, which are designed to get students talking. It gives students who don't necessarily think that they're the math kids in the class chances to talk. A lot of the routines are designed that way. For example, notice and wonder, or which one doesn't belong. There are lots of ways you can decide which one doesn't belong. It could be the color, it could be something mathematical. And those students get a chance to hear the other students talking about the mathematical reasons, but they also get a chance to talk. And one anecdote, I mean, when I visited Sunnyside School in Tucson, one of the teachers said to me, yeah, those warm-up routines, they really get the kids who are too cool for school talking. And so we certainly have heard that quite a lot.
Alrighty, well, thank you very much. I think we're going to go ahead and close with that. I'd like to thank Liz and Bill for your time. Liz, for putting all this together, and I mean, really, the entire writing team that went through putting these enhancements together. We've gotten tons of positive comments just from what just from the little bit that you've shown. So thank you for your time in presenting, and thank you all of you for attending. We will have by Friday, we will post the recording as well as the answers to all of the questions, and you'll get an email from us with a link to the page with that recording available. I know, unfortunately, we got a message. I think one teacher said they were unable to log in for some reason. So we'll make everyone who registered will get the email with the link to the recording and to the questions and answers. So hopefully everyone will get the information they need. So with that, everyone enjoy your evening and enjoy Teacher Appreciation Week. Thank you.